Simon Kuper, a man who needs no introduction, although I will introduce you anyway, if that's okay. You are an author and journalist based in Paris, and you've written an article for Esquire UK about Kylian Mbappé, the French football star. How did you get an interview with Kylian Mbappé? I know footballers are famously hard to get to sit down with for more than about 4 minutes.
Yeah, footballers are very hard to get, so I never spend any time pursuing them. I never invest that time myself. But sometimes a newspaper or magazine will get the interview and then ask me to do it. And that's what happened this time. Esquire had got Mbappé, I'm not quite sure how or why. And so I interviewed him sort of in conjunction with a photo shoot. First, he had a 2-hour photo shoot with some kind of collection. That's often the case with footballer interviews. And then he sat down with me for nearly an hour.
Was that enough time? It doesn't sound like very long to do a whole profile.
For a footballer interview, an hour is quite long, and he was very sort of forthcoming. I was worried that he would be tired after a 2-hour photo shoot. It was in this villa that he owns in Neuilly, which is about the wealthiest suburb of Paris. He doesn't actually live there. He bought it to house his foundation, which brings together poor kids and rich kids in after-school activities. So this beautiful villa, which used to belong to a famous designer. And so in the end, this was during COVID, and I have to say that we were all packed quite closely together in this little room. Him, his father, who was his coach and is his kind of manager, agent, and his lawyer and various other people all crowding around. A footballer is very rarely completely alone.
Has he been vaccinated,
He's been vaccinated since, because he tweeted out very proudly his vaccination. I had my first jab at that time, but I was quite anxious afterwards. But they have very strict protocols. So when I arrived at the villa, I was supposed to have done a test. I hadn't realized that, but then they tested me on the spot. There was a nurse there who tested everyone coming in and out.
Really? She put it up your nose right in front of his house?
Yeah. There was this guy. He was a male nurse. Actually, there were 2 nurses, and the man put the thing up my nose. And 3 of the people in the photo shoot team had actually been sent home because they tested positive. This was, France was having a terrible time in the pandemic then.
Wow, gosh. Okay, well, the things we journalists do for interviews. And so you sat down with him, and you were struck by how, he's 23 now?
Me too.
He's only 22. And you were struck by how poised he was. You said he was as precise in his footing you said he makes short speeches in complete sentences, as precise in his footing as he is on the field.
Yeah, it was a bit like interviewing a kind of veteran TV anchorman who knows exactly what he's saying. Mbappé is a very bright guy, but he's also, like a lot of footballers today, he's grown up a professional. Essentially, he's been a professional since about the age of 12, 13, when he was already being courted. He grew up in a suburb of Paris called Bondy, quite a poor suburb, but his father is an amateur football coach. His uncle was an amateur football coach. So he's grown up in this top sports environment. His mother played first division handball, and the family adopted an older boy who had a troubled family himself. And this older boy has been a professional footballer for a decade. So he grows up in the sports environment, highly professional. So from the age of 13, he's being prepared for the higher stage. He knows exactly what to say.
He says later that when he's asked to tell his future children about his childhood exploits, he won't actually have any, because he's just been in football his whole childhood.
Well, and he also can't go outside. He told me it takes an organization to go anywhere to meet his friends, because as soon as Kylian Mbappé, the most famous man in France, goes onto the street, everyone mobs him, and then they send photos to their friends saying, "Here's me with Kylian Mbappé," and so then everyone flocks to the space. So it's really a terrible life in a way.
But there's so much to talk about, but let's start at Bondy. Can you tell us a little bit more about the suburb? It's just northeast of Paris. It's a half-hour drive from the center of Paris?
Yeah, it's a half-hour drive or a complicated bus ride. Like a lot of Parisian suburbs, it's not well connected to public transport. And I actually went there about 3 years ago to interview his youth coaches. And, there's a very kind of organized amateur club like you have all over the Paris region. And these guys, as well as Mbappe's coach, who was a coach at the club, had been coaching him from childhood. But so Mbappe is a natural, but he's also been very professionally coached. Paris is the city in the world that produces the best footballers, because you have all these kids playing soccer on artificial fields. They can play all the time. And then you have these coaches with diplomas. Every club in the poorest suburb has that. So Bondy, if you go there, it looks like a lot of the Parisian suburbs of the banlieue. It looks a bit like there was an old French village, which there was, and there's still the church there. And then somebody built a kind of Soviet town on it, you know, with these ugly tower blocks. One tower block in town actually has this mural of him, this kind of, you know, 60-meter mural of him across. So he's kind of hero Bondy. He's known as Kylian National in Bondy.
But it is a mostly immigrant suburb, Bondy?
Yeah.
Or at least the people whose parents were immigrants.
Yeah, I mean, the banlieue are always a mix. You never go to one that's entirely non-white or entirely white. It's always quite mixed. And Mbappe's family kind of expresses the mixité, as the French call it, of the banlieue, because his father was born in Cameroon and came to Paris as a child with his parents. And his mother is of Algerian origin, born in Paris. So it was a Cameroonian Algerian couple, which caused problems because, you know, it's not totally accepted that a North African woman and a West African Christian man get together, but they did. And they became kind of mainstays of Bondy. I mean, everyone in Bondy knows the father, Wilfried, and the mother, Faiza. She runs after school activities in the schools. He's coached, you know, every kid in Bondy at football. And so this is a kind of family that's very present. She's always around the schools. She's helping organize school trips to Greece and helping kids who don't have enough money come on the school trip. So they're a very kind of associative family, as the French would say. They're part of these local associations in a big way. He also has several relatives who are school teachers in the Paris region. When I interview a footballer, I always try to think, what would he have been if he hadn't been able to play football, if he hadn't been a good footballer? And with Mbappé, I thought he would have been a popular school teacher somewhere in the Paris region.
Like the most charismatic high school teacher in all of Bondy.
The fun, young high school teacher, yeah.
Yeah. And he really grew up, he said he had a view of the football field outside his bedroom window. And he grew up not just playing football, but going around with his father and uncle, who were both coaches. And that was very important for his kind of maturation as a footballer, because he says he came to see, he was able to, because a coach needs to see football from the player's perspective. So he learned to see the game, not just from his own perspective, but from sitting around his father and uncle who are coaching, from the other players' perspectives as well.
Yeah, I mean, from the age of 4, he's been listening to tactical talks in the changing room. I mean, my Dutch hero, Johan Cruyff, grew up sort of opposite Ajax Amsterdam. And from the age of 4, he was hanging around in the first team changing room, listening to tactical talks. And of course, that changes you, because the coach is trying to say, this is how we play as a team. And Mbappé said to me, look, most individual players, they can only think about their own problems. They can't think about the team's problems. And he said, but I can. So he said, when I'm on the field, I'm thinking about every other player. Like, this guy isn't in the match, he's having problems, he's stressed. And so he said, I can put myself in the position of teammates and think for the team in a way that a coach can. And he says that's why he's able to play in almost any position in the forward line. He said, other players are specialists. But he said, you can put me in any kind of position as a forward and I'll cope, because I can think football like a coach.
But this is also what makes him an amazing footballer, because as you say in your piece, like most footballers, even strikers, will just play one tactical position, where he is literally able to play any position on the line at a moment's notice.
Yeah, I mean, he says, look, there's not many people who can do that. And he said, that is my upbringing. And he got it from home. I mean, it's very hard for another person to reach that level of tactical sophistication as when your dad and your uncle are telling you this stuff.
Okay, so going back to his childhood, I mean, as you've said, in the neighborhood where he grew up, becoming a professional footballer, and the reason why there are so many great footballers come out of there is because football is the main kind of extracurricular activity. It's the focus of people. There are many, fathers who are trying to raise their sons to be professional footballers. Does that explain why there are so many great footballers who come out of those neighborhoods?
I think you've also got to remember that this is France, and France is a very centralized country where the state provides sport and school and everything for everyone everywhere. And so in the suburbs of Paris, although they're quite poor, the state is very present. So that football field he grew up opposite, that was built by the state, that's funded by the state. The youth coaches I interviewed are paid by the state. And trained by the state, informed by them. Yeah, and so they all have diplomas. and they're all using the most cutting edge methods that have been approved by the Central French Football Federation. And so if you're a gifted athlete in France, you get picked up almost wherever you live in the country, and you get trained to the highest possible level. So it's this combination of kids out playing on the fields, which are artificial fields, which means you can play on them 24 hours a day. They never kind of, you can't play on grass 24 hours a day because it would just become bare, but you can play on artificial fields 24 hours a day, and then you're being coached. So you have this kind of 10,000 hours of practice that people talk about, but you're also getting the world's best training. There's very few countries in the world that do that.
Okay, but he was, of all these people, the best. At what age was he spotted as, or recognized as? Yeah.
By the time he's 13 or so, clubs like Real Madrid and Chelsea are inviting him on visits. And so he goes to Real Madrid. I think he celebrates his 14th birthday there. And he meets Cristiano Ronaldo. He grows up with posters of Cristiano Ronaldo, but he meets him. And at Real Madrid send out their famous French assistant coach at the time, Zinedine Zidane, the most famous French player. And Zinedine Zidane says to the 14-year-old Mbappé, come, I'll give you a lift in the car to the training ground. And Mbappé is so overcome, Zidane is offering him a lift in what, of course, is the most fabulous car he's ever seen. And he says to Zidane, should I take off my shoes before I get in your car? And Zidane says, no, no problem. So this is how clubs court kids like that. They bring you over, they give your family a slap up 5 days in London or Madrid, and then they introduce you to heroes, so you will always remember that.
So what happened next for him? What was his first entrance into the sort of professional leagues?
Well, because the family just knows sport very, very well. I mean, he said to me, look, I didn't introduce a new hobby into my family. I mean, they knew how it worked. So the dad worked out which is the best club for him to go to. He can go almost anywhere. And they decided, we'll go to Monaco, which is a very successful club in French football, because the route to the first team is short there. 2 years in Monaco from 15 or so, and then by 16, he was playing for the first team. And so they worked it all out. And then the next step, it could have been Barcelona, it could have been Paris. He comes back to Paris. Paris pay 160 million euros or so for him, the second highest transfer fee in the history of football. He's only 18, and he comes back to play for his hometown club. So he's a Parisian playing for Paris, which people find very exciting.
But he's also a kid. Like, all of the things that you described happened like in the last kind of 10 years. So how was he treated? What was it like for him to be this sort of big shot, but who was 10 years younger than everybody else?
Well, I mean, very quickly, he's also playing for France. And in the French team, they tease him at the World Cup. They say, oh, they're kind of mocking the media talk. They say, oh, Kylian, look how he's come on. And he's only 14 years old. So they kind of, he's 18, but they're teasing him as a little boy. And he said, look, when you walk into the France changing room, this is, a team that's trying to win the World Cup. And he says, and you're 18 and everyone says you're a super talent. He says, nobody wants you there. None of the players want to give their place to this kind of kid who they see as an intruder or a big head. So he says, the reason these guys are so good is because they don't want to give up their place to anyone. And he said, you walk in there, you have to be super confident, but also respectful. He says, that's the balance you have to maintain. And because he's grown up in top sport from the age of 13, it's sort of normal to him. He's not taken aback. He's not swayed by it. He plays for France. They get to the World Cup final. He's at that point 19 years old. And I said, well, you nervous? He said, yeah, I had a little trouble sleeping the night before. But he said, when the day of the final, I was fine. It was completely normal. And this French assistant coach said it was like he was playing Dijon in the French league. He was just completely underwhelmed by playing in a World Cup final.
Well, he said, actually, you quote him as saying, the closer he got to the match, the calmer he was to the World Cup.
Yeah, because great players, the place where they know what's going on and they know what to do is the football field. That's sort of the place they have the least problem, the fewest anxieties. I mean, Mbappé is very well placed to cope with people off the field. Some footballers are not good at dealing with people off the field, but the best footballers, what they want is to be on the field. They know how that works. That's where they feel in control.
It's like actors say they're happiest on the stage.
Yeah, I mean, I had this weird experience when I was just writing my book about FC Barcelona. One day they let me play on the field of the Camp Nou, which is the biggest stadium in Europe, 90,000 seats. So I go on there, wearing my street clothes with a football. I'm allowed to kick a lot of balls at the goal, dribble around. And one thing I feel as somebody who's just played amateur football is this is recognizable. It's just a football field. It's like the football field I grew up in. Okay, it's the grass is perfect and there's 90,000 seats over there, but it's very recognizable. And that's sort of calming, that every football field you go onto, you know what that is.
Mhm. But even among professional footballers, Mbappe seems extraordinary in that he said he noticed when he entered professional football that the players seemed very tense when they were playing. He saw the tension on their faces and he just felt completely relaxed. Again, it's probably because he grew up in the sport. And
Is that, and because he's better? You see, most players, football is stress because you are walking on tiptoe to survive in the big leagues. And you play against, if you play against Mbappe, you play against Messi, that's very stressful. This one guy says that when he plays against Messi, he worries that Messi will humiliate him on the field with the ball, and then it will become a clip on Twitter that will go, viral on Twitter for 2 weeks. And so these normal players have anxiety. Am I going to be left out of the team? Is my career going to end? Is the next coach not going to like me? Will I be humiliated in front of the world? But if you're Mbappe or Messi, you think, this is great. The field for me is a place of self-expression.
yeah.
And I am the best. And Mbappe said to me, when you go onto the field, he says, I always tell myself, I'm the best, I'm the greatest. And he said, you have to do that because nobody else is going to give you the confidence to perform at top level except you. He said, you have to do it yourself. And he said, look, I know I'm not the best. I know that Messi is better than me. Cristiano is better than me. I will never be as good as those guys. I was quite struck he said that because most people see Mbappe as the best player of his generation, that in 5 years' time, he's going to be the best player in the world, or 2 years' time. But he said, look, I know those guys are better, but I always say to myself, you are the greatest, Kylian.
Do you think he'll be better than them one day? Can he still keep rising? Because you said that strikers like him tend to peak in their early 20s, which he's in now.
Yeah, I think this is probably his peak. He's 22, so give it another 2 or 3 years, that's his peak. I think he'll look after himself very well. So like Cristiano is also a fast striker. He might, have a long career. But I do think nobody in football would say that he could become Messi or even Cristiano. I mean, these guys are the two most successful club footballers in history. There is a level above Mbappe, and that's Messi.
Uh-huh. What does make Mbappe so good? And what is the difference between him and Messi? What's the gap? Mbappe
is fantastically fast. He always makes the correct decision on the field. So in football, football is a game of decisions. Should I pass? Should I shoot? Where should I be? And 88 minutes of the game, you don't have the ball as a player. So you have to, 88 minutes, this is about decision-making of that position. He makes those decisions very well. And he has a great shot. He's very cool in front of goal. He scores a lot. He can dribble past somebody. What Messi can do is Messi can dribble past 3 guys. Messi can hit only with his left foot, but that's enough. He can hit any ball, any way. Yeah. Just the ability to dribble past people. I think that's the main difference between Messi and Mbappe, and nobody in the history of football has seen a pass as well as Messi, except maybe Maradona.
Mm-hmm. So Mbappe knows that's what he can't do. That's what he sees, the magic.
Yeah, Mbappe is a brilliant specialist, the best specialist in the world, specialist attacker, goal scorer, and Messi is the perfect footballer. I mean, but it's an unfair comparison. I mean, it's like saying to a writer, well, he or she is not Tolstoy. Well, so what? You can still be a writer,
Leads France to victory in the World Cup. He's national hero. And he goes back to
victory. He wins it with them. He's one of the key players. He scores a goal in the World Cup final.
Mm-hmm. And he goes back to Bondy.
Yeah, a couple of months. So first, on the field after the World Cup final, he's interviewed and somebody says, look, Kylian, you've won a World Cup at 19. Nobody has done that for 36 years. How can you go on from here? And he said, c'est déjà bien. It's already good, but now I'm going to do this and that. I mean, for him, he said to me, it was never a final moment, a finalité. It was always just a step on the way, because top athletes never think, oh, I've won that. They think tomorrow. It's always about what's next, because you have to kind of constantly force yourself to perform. They go back to the Champs-Élysées. The Champs-Élysées is packed with tens of thousands of people. People are going crazy. And Mbappe, 19 years old, just won the World Cup. He says to the, elderly president of the French Football Federation, he says, people are really so excited, aren't they? And he's not carried away. And then a couple of months later, it's arranged that he'll go back to Bondy with the World Cup. He wanted to take the World Cup back to his hometown. He felt that was very important.
And he also emerged as really a leader of the French team and a leader at PSG. I mean, even though he's 22, he sort of he has the such well-developed emotional intelligence that he's become, along with Neymar, kind of elder statesman of the club.
Yeah, I mean, he said to me, look, I'm not a young player anymore, I'm 22. I mean, he's been a pro for 5 or 6 years at the top level, and he can talk to people of different ages. He speaks very good English and Spanish, which is important in football, so he can communicate with all the Latin players of Paris Saint-Germain. So yeah, he doesn't see himself as a kind of upcoming young player at all.
Yeah, somebody made a comment saying he just like understands the codes of the dressing rooms. He knows who to sit with, who to talk to about what. That's fascinating.
Yeah, dressing rooms are very hierarchical places. So everyone has a spot for a start. Everyone has a spot on the bus. The older players, the senior players are sitting at a table, also at lunch, and you can't necessarily just join them. So you have to understand all these unspoken rules. And so he looks at a glance and he can see what he's allowed to do, what he's not allowed to do, but he's not timid. You know, he will speak to people, but he understands the hierarchies that you have to respect, which is complicated when you're younger, but you're also better than most of the other players. It's a very fine line to tread, which he treads.
Yeah. And at this point in his career, he's become more politically active. He's done, can you tell us about that and how, and to what extent he feels comfortable entering politics?
Yeah, in recent times, he's begun tweeting and commenting about police violence, which is a problem in France as it is in the US. And that was the one point in the interview where I was stopped. So I asked him about, you know, police violence, and he talked about it. And then I said, well, it must be particularly personal to you as a kind of young man from the banlieue, and young men from the banlieue, non-white young men from the banlieue are the biggest victims of police violence in France, as they sort of their equivalents are in the US. And then this man to my left, a burly middle-aged man who I then realized was the father, said, no, we're not going to answer that. You're presenting it as if it's just young people from the banlieue who are victims of police violence. That's not true. And that was his father saying, I think, we're not going to set up Kylian as the young black guy who's against the police, because in France, there would be very little tolerance for a national hero taking that role. So he's become politically active, but the family are managing that very carefully. They don't want to set him up as a countercultural Colin Kaepernick sort of figure.
Yeah, it's interesting because when you asked him if he feels French, he said, oh yes, completely. He said he was never made to not feel French. And that surprised me, because that classically you hear from kids in the suburbs feeling a bit alienated from Frenchness and being somehow having that being at least an issue for them in their lives.
Yeah, I mean, when France won the World Cup, Trevor Noah and other people also joked that Africa had won the World Cup because a large number of the French players have African origins, like Mbappé. And the players didn't like that. And they insisted on their Frenchness. And so they're not saying, you know, Paul Pogba is of Ghanaian origin and Samuel Umtiti is of Cameroonian origin. They're not saying, look, we're not of African origin. They're proud of their origins. They're proud of their families. But they don't want to be told that they're not French. And in football terms, they're 100% French. I mean, these guys were not taught football in African countries. Every single one of that French squad learned his football in France. Right. And when it's not just these guys who are stars who feel French, when France was playing the key matches of the World Cup, there were scenes from Bondy of thousands of people in this poor suburb, sitting in front of big screens outside that the town hall had put up, watching France, cheering France, you know, red, white, and blue paint on their faces. These kids in Bondy, I mean, our friend Jake McCauley said at the time, he said, you know, the right-wing idea is that these are the lost territories of the Republic, that France has lost control over them. He said, these aren't the lost territories of the Republic. This is the Republic. These people want to be accepted as full members of the Republic of France. They say, look, we are French. You guys have to accept that.
Yeah. Well, I would recommend to everyone that they read your article in Esquire UK profiling the French footballer Kylian Mbappé. I'm slightly biased because I'm married to you, but I think it's a wonderful read. What can I say?
Thank you very much.
Okay.